Good afternoon and welcome to the American Floral Endowment Grow Pro webinar series. I'm your moderator, Melissa Muñoz. I'm a member of the AFE's Young Professional Council and an NC State University postdoctoral research scholar at the Mountain Horticultural Crops Research and Extension Center. I have a master's and a PhD in plant and environmental sciences for Clemson University, both working with botrytis blight management in cut roses. Today's session is the use of drones in cut flower production. On behalf of the Endowment, I'm excited to be part of the AFE Grow Pro webinar series that features a new topic every month, presented by an industry member. The webinars are free to everyone thanks to the generous support of AFE sponsors. The views and opinions expressed in these webinars are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect on the views or positions of the AFE. As an independent nonprofit, AFE cannot endorse any specific product or opinion. Today's webinar is sponsored by Bloombeat. Bloombeat, by Grower Talks, is a twice-monthly online newsletter that provides timely tips, advice, and commentary for specialty cut flower growers. If you would like to learn more about our sponsors or are interested in becoming a sponsor for a topic, you can find more information on the AFE's website at endowment.org/growpro, as you will find it in the chat. Today's session was pre-recorded in English by Christian Nansen. After the presentation, Dr. Christian Nansen will join us for a Q&A, so feel free to submit your questions through the Q&A feature or the chat at any time. We will answer as many questions as possible as we can before the end of the hour. Any unanswered questions may be answered through a separate email exchange. This session is being recorded and will be shared to the AFE's YouTube account. Through YouTube accessibility features, you can access closed captions in other languages. To get us started, I would like to share a bit about today's expert speaker. Dr. Christian Nansen is a professor in the Department of Entomology and Nematology at UC Davis, where he specializes in applied insect ecology, IPM, remote sensing, host plant stress detection, host selection by arthropods, pesticide performance, and use of reflectance-based imaging. He completed his PhD in zoology at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark, before joining the UC Davis faculty in 2014. He also held faculty positions at Texas A&M, Texas Tech, and most recently at the University of Western Australia. Dr. Nansen, welcome and thank you for presenting today on the use of drones in cut flower production.
Right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Christian Nansen. I'm a professor at UC Davis, and I have been the fortunate recipient of funding from the American Floral Endowment and from Canners, and worked with the horticultural industry for quite a number of years here in my applied research program. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. We're going to talk predominantly about drones, but we may deviate a little bit and get into some other areas as well. Because as somebody who originates from Denmark, explaining the accent, I feel I'm in a position to use Lego blocks. That Lego is one of Danish is a Danish product, and I really think what we are talking about more broadly is about use of technology. So thinking of drones as just one of multiple technologies in our toolbox at our disposal when we look into sustainable crop production. And it's really about reconfiguring, putting those blocks together in unique ways that make crop production sustainable, but more equally important, making it economically viable. right? And as a professor, also using this combination of technologies to entice, to encourage young people to pursue careers in agriculture as something that they may not think of as relevant to them, but actually by looking at these technological integrations, maybe they get interested, and that's clearly what we are seeing in my program. So we can look at sustainable crop production in the 21st century as something that is evolving around a lot of technologies. In my program, we work with something called coal plasma, which I hope to share with you some information about in the future. We work with lighting. We work with robotics and actuation, and that's something I'm going to be talking about today, and also optical sensing. And of course, those are technologies that can be mounted on drones if we have to, but they don't need to. But this is essentially what is highlighted here at the bottom, what we are going to focus on today. But we do many other things as part of this program that I'm managing. So and before we get into the drones, I want to highlight, because I'm so focused and interested in technologies, I think it's very important to mention that there are many other super important and very cool technologies out there that I will not be talking about, but I hope that growers, stakeholders, so funding bodies and others who are listening to this, that you all follow up on these technologies and learn about in different ways through podcasts and TED Talks and trade journal magazines and maybe even presentations like this or conferences. You familiarize yourself with the concept of high throughput phenotyping and how that can be used, the different molecular technologies that are being used to develop crops with higher resistance to different pests, and of course the even more advanced gene editing and how that is making its way into crop production. How we will be, I think, as a community, we will be seeing a complete change in how crops are being grown. More and more crops are being grown inside, where we can control the environment and optimize inputs and minimize inputs and make things very, very efficient. So how we can do all that, and of course lighting, but also fertigation and temperature control and humidity control, and so many aspects of this that are just absolutely fascinating. Where these are technologies that will revolutionize what we consider agriculture and crop production today, right? And of course, as the last one, also the use of stationary sensors if we are outside, related to weather and soil, but of course environmental sensors inside our controlled environments as well, and networks and how they can be turned into decision support tools and mapping and shared with different facilities, and trends turn into databases and modeling. Very, very exciting technologies that are just maturing more and more and becoming more and more relevant and more applicable, more and more useful to people in the ornamental crop production as well. So the title of my talk was given to me, so the use of drones in cut flower production. And I will be, and I am a kind of a bold person, so I will say, if you walk away with one thing from this presentation, it should be that, I mean, of course you're going to be, if you're not already using drones, you will be using drones in the very near future for a whole lot of reasons, just like you will be using a hammer. I mean, how can you imagine running your operations without occasionally using a hammer? We are basically talking about something that will be very common and will be, it still has a lot of, I think, sexiness, or people think, wow, you work with drones. Well, it's not that. It's just a vehicle. It's just a way to move something. So you also use tractors. You use other vehicles in your and airplanes, maybe even. So you will also be using drones for sure. And so I'm going to go through in this presentation some of the ways that I think drones fit in, and hopefully you will walk away with this notion that yes, if we're not doing it already, we should definitely be doing this in the very near future. So flying a drone, well, you can certainly start out at the most basic level, I would say, which is so RGB based quality control is what I call this. So RGB is basically you flying a small camera with red, green, and blue, right? So a 3-channel camera, small, light. It could be a GoPro or something similar. That can be extremely useful for a number of reasons. So I can easily imagine that simply mapping out your facilities, mapping them over time, if construction, if you're doing some soil treatments or doing something out there, keeping track of how things are going. So sending out the drone instead of having people going out there and walk the whole thing and map it all out, you can. So just as a basic mapping tool, clearly it's very, very useful. And if you are preparing beds, or you are setting up beds, or you are laying out irrigation equipment, how well are the guys doing out there? How does it look? How uniform? How straight are the lines? All that kind of stuff can be done very, very easily, and should be done with a simple camera, right? So of course you're going to do that. And then once you actually have a crop that's growing out there, do you have skips, right? So I was giving a talk to vineyard growers the other day, and clearly they are very concerned about skips, and because that changes the growth pattern of the adjacent plants. So, and they need to order to fill out those skips. So how many do they need to order? You may have the same problem, that you need to fill out certain parts if you have big holes. You may get weed issues. You may have other concerns if you have openings in your plant density. So maybe it's worthwhile for you to actually know where there are holes, where there are skips, and do something about it. So that is clearly something a simple little drone with an RGB camera can help you with. Definitely, I have been in many almond orchards over the years where you walk and we are checking insect traps, and we suddenly sink in deeper than our ankles into mud because there's a irrigation pipe busted and water's just gushing out somewhere. I've even found tadpoles in the middle of a giant patch of tadpoles in an almond orchard at one point. It was like a little lake. So water being lost, huge consequences for the harvest later on, and the quality of the almonds. You may not have that particular, I mean, you don't have that particular problem, but you have other reasons to be very worried about irrigation pipes not working. And maybe you have pressure gauges, different places that can tell you what's going on. But a simple image can also just show you, is water accumulating? And it's very quick. You can fly over at different altitudes, and you don't need very high spatial resolution to pick up, is it working? Did they just finished putting out the pipes and we turned on the water? Are there any leaks, right? That is definitely an area where you can be doing something. If there's an abiotic event, if there's a heat wave coming through, or frost, or something, a fire, or something, what impact did it have? You can go out and see if certain areas are scorched, if they are showing some stress symptoms. That can all be picked up with a drone costing a few $100s, right? You just need to have the software and learn how to operate that. So that is really very, very useful. And I'm specifically talking about abiotic because that will, if it's something like weather related or even if there's some irrigation issues or something, right? So there's either too much water or too little water. That will typically be in a bigger area. So when we have something very large and something very dramatic, we should be able to pick it up with a simple RGB camera. It should be very visible that there's something going on over there. And then we can send out a crew and say, tell me what's going on. So we can then move to the next level, which is, okay, we go beyond the RGB. So it's not that we should have an RGB drone. So that's one hammer. Just like we have multiple screwdrivers or multiple hammers, it's not whether you are using whether you're using a drone or not. You will be using drones, and you will have different drones that have different purposes, just like your different hammers or screwdrivers. So you will very likely also be interested in having a drone, either the same drone but with a different slightly different camera, or you may have separate units. It may actually be easier just to have separate systems. So this drone is going to have most people are familiar with this NDVI, this index of greenness. So this requires that we have some spectral information beyond the three traditional bands. So we need some information in the near infrared. So it's a slightly different camera, and it really tailored to looking at the crop itself and how well it's growing. So we can look at, if we're doing fertigation, are the plants being uniformly green across our fields, between fields and within fields? So greenness is something that can be picked up very, very well and very, very, very reliably with an NDVI based imaging system. So the growth, are they performing? Are the plants developing the way we expected them to? Are we a little bit behind? Are we ahead of schedule? What does that mean for the people that we need to hire? What does that mean for our contracts with selling of different flowers? What does that mean for ordering boxes or whatever materials we need to make bouquets or whatever, right? So this is part of your logistical management. Just regularly fly your crop and make sure that we are on schedule. How is it actually growing? And if something suddenly comes in as a weather event or something, did it slow us down? Did it speed things up? So that we can predict our yield. So we may also call up the people we are selling our flowers to make sure, hey, guess what? I think we actually may have a bigger crop than we thought. And the earlier you can predict that, the better price you can probably get, and the more logistics you can put in place, right? So this is really, really important for you as a manager, as somebody who's trying to maximize. Maybe you need to find more places to sell your flowers because you're going to have more than you thought. And the timing of harvest, when is it going to start? When is it going to finish? The logistics of that. So definitely that I think is going to be very important to you as well. And then we go into something more. So these are sort of the basic drones for keeping track, quality control, predicting and whatnot. So what you're seeing here is a very large drone used for spraying of pesticides. And this is taken in a vineyard where we did some demonstration. I don't do this myself or in my group, but there are other researchers and companies that are working on this. And I don't know if this is something you have looked into already. I suspect you've at least heard about it, and it's becoming more and more relevant, more and more popular in this country. In many other parts of the world, it's taking off. It's the way to go in places with terrain. So vineyards can be you can have issues with topography. But also places like Japan, they are doing it a lot. China, Brazil, many places in Europe. So you can actually argue in many ways that US is kind of behind on this front, and it's a little bit sad that it's not picking up more. There's some red tape that has been and have caused problems. But I think it's important that growers look into this and look at what this can do. And just to give you some specs, if you're not familiar with this, so these drones can actually fly decent acreages in a single day. And depending on how big your spray rigs are and whatnot, I don't know that you can compete with this. So potentially faster than getting your sprays done, much faster than if you go with a ground rig. They do use much lower volumes of water, but they also they get down, and then the downdraft from these ginormous drones actually create vortex and swivel the vegetation around, so you actually get very good coverage and very good penetration. So it's even under windy conditions. So this is something that is very interesting, and something that has lots of interesting aspect to it. So because it's so there's all this downdraft into the canopy, there are reasons to believe that you can get very high consistency, much better penetration, even with small droplets than with some of the ground rigs. There are people arguing that even using a lot of water to get big droplets and therefore get good penetration, that actually means that the pesticide itself is running off and leaching into groundwater and others. It's not staying on the canopy. So yes, technically you're getting better coverage with more water, but the pesticide may actually end up in a different place. So using less water at a very high, the same amount of active ingredient, but at a much higher concentration, could potentially be advantageous. You don't have to worry about compacting of soil. If that's something you're worried about, certainly in strawberries and in vineyards, that's something they're very worried about. I could imagine that many of you guys are as well if you're out in open field environments. So, well, this thing is not even touching the ground, so there's no compacting of soil, and it can, even when the soil is wet, even if it can go out and it can spray, right? It's almost weather independent. They can even spray when it rains, for that matter. So whether soil is wet, not a problem. So compacting of soil, not an issue. If you don't want to spray the whole field, if you have reasons to believe, if you have combined your spraying with drones with also some imaging and actually found out that we actually don't need to spray the whole field, well, you can do spot treatment very efficiently with a drone. That would, with a ground rig, would be very, very cumbersome to have to turn it on and off and work with, fill it up. Have a big tank that you only fill up a little bit and whatnot. Working with a 13-gallon tank here allows you to spot treat very, very, very efficiently. And soon the speed of this may actually go up, because there's more and more support for legislation that will allow swarms of these to fly at the same time. So this will be very interesting. So getting into this and getting some quotes and hearing more about this, I would strongly encourage you to go down that route and also look at whether this is something that is relevant to you. Drift is, of course, a big issue in many horticultural environments where we are close to urban areas, and the drift on this, because of the downdraft, because the drone can be flying very, very low, can potentially be very low. We are very interested in that, but it seems like the risk of drift can actually be reduced by using drones. So some very, very interesting advantages or aspects of this technology. And then we're moving into some of the stuff that I do more of, and what you are seeing here is also a decent sized drone, and you can see that has a big belly here. There's a big tank underneath. We call that the bug butt, because it's a robot that releases bugs. So release of natural enemies with drone-based systems to make that technology more practically feasible. I will argue that a lot of growers today are hesitant to use natural enemies because it's a pain in the butt to go out and sprinkle them or getting them dispersed within their fields. We want to lower that adoption threshold by developing technologies that allows drones to fly over and sprinkle the natural enemies where they need to be. And again, it's just like with the pesticide spraying, there are companies doing this for sure. And we think, and that's great, but we also think that there are very, very issues that need to be worked on that. But just to summarize why this is intriguing, or another way of using drones is it's potentially you can have huge labor savings. You can get much more uniformity of your release, because if somebody is sprinkling it out going down the rows, they're going to run out before they end end up with some material that they did just to dump, or so making sure that so the likelihood of getting more uniform, consistent spread within your field, I think, is much higher. The feasibility of it, time savings, of course, and it just means that it with this technology maturing and these devices becoming more available, and the drone systems being commercialized and operated by companies, or you yourself can learn about this, well, it becomes, we can then rely on this, and therefore rely less on pesticides, which is something we all want, so we can avoid these resistance issues that are always going to be a concern.
This launch isn't shooting for the moon or a distant planet. No rocket boosters are needed. And the passengers inside? Insects.
We developed, in collaboration with USDA, a drone-based system for releasing sterile insects.
Codling moths have long been a foe at Hayden Farms of Pasco, Washington. But when the apple and cherry producers switched a half dozen years ago to organic apple practices, meaning synthetic pesticides were no longer an option, they struggled to keep control.
The major pest in apples by far is codling moth. And so when we first converted, we were clean. Coming from conventional to organic, we didn't have any codling moth problems. Then we had a neighbor that was organic and kind of got in trouble with the farm, and his control went to heck. A lot of problems, and those problems drifted over to us. We tried every means possible to control codling moths.
Hayden says they ultimately needed an answer beyond just natural oils and an insect virus spray. Those worked, but oils can only be applied a few times before harming the trees, and the viral spray needed to be reapplied repeatedly, driving their pesticide spending up. The viral spray also had to be consumed by the insects, meaning they would leave tiny bite holes in the fruit, known as stings. Inspired by Washington State University's research into sterilized insects as biocontrols in orchards, Hayden decided to give it a try, hiring M3.
We were really shocked the first year. We saw real good results. We still had some stings that first year with it. Since then, we have really been very clean. This year, I mean, I might have seen a couple stings all season in 125 acres.
Although drone delivery of insects is relatively new, sterile insect technique, or SIT, is not. USDA has been using sterile insect strategies for decades, most notably when airplanes dropped sterilized pink bollworms, an insect that once devastated cotton crops all over the South. In 2018, USDA announced it had successfully eradicated pink bollworm.
The pink bollworm is officially eradicated.
Present in the U.S. ecosystem for more than a century. After being awarded a grant, M3 began working with USDA in 2014 on developing a rapid response system in case of any small breakouts of pink bollworm. 4 years later, the Dayton, Ohio-based company got to work figuring out how to safely ship and store sterilized Mexican fruit flies, lady beetles, codling moths, and other insects from insect-rearing facilities before attempting to drop sometimes reluctant bugs from drones into treetops. The company designed its own drones and release devices.
when we went up to Washington and started releasing sterile codling moth, and we retreated 50 acres. In 2019, we treated 1,200 acres, and that was our first year of commercial sales. Now we are at 4,000 acres in 2022 and growing quite nicely.
The company, now with 10 employees, has moved away from its previous dependence on government grants. Besides contracts in Washington, M3 now has customers in California, Idaho, and Michigan. Part of the reason for the growing enthusiasm among producers is that insects, just like weeds, develop resistance to pesticides.
Altitude is 30.
Various studies estimate the value of natural biological control of native pests in U.S. crops at between $1.7 billion and $5.5 billion. A Canadian facility is the only large-scale insectary rearing sterilized codling moths. Crumpets expects demand to grow for other insects, especially predatory mites that feed on two-spotted spider mites, which are harmful to crops like hops and strawberries. Also, green lacewing, which eat other harmful aphids, show promise for many specialty crops, including fruits, nuts, and marijuana.
So I decided to show, so this is an edited NPR video that so the link to the full video is at the bottom of this, but it's because I think even though this is apples, I think the flower production industry is facing very similar issues. And with drones and with release of natural enemies with drones, we can also look at something like sterile insect technology. We may actually be able to, in the future, to produce these sterile insects, these sterile males that can be released and then mate with females so that they produce non-viable offspring. This today would be inconceivable to do without drones, because we need to have them released. And of course, a lot of mosquito control programs and others, that would be areas where sterile insects are being used. So this is not new, but it's new maybe to the flower industry, but should be something that the key stakeholders should be looking into and try to promote and influence, lobby for, that it could be done, because we now have the drones, we have the technology to release these sterile males. So I think that could be very, very exciting. And of course, we are in my group, we are very interested in looking at the fluid mechanics of what happens underneath a drone here when we release them. What is the effect of wind and speed? So there's a lot of research that needs to be done in order to make sure that when they're being flown and when they're being released, that they end up where they need to be, that you are not paying for your neighbor's biological control program, that they don't drift, just like drift, actually, that they end up in your field. So can we control the drone? Can the drone sense where it is and make sure that we get the best spray? So, and then there are some I'm sort of running out of time here, so I'm going to be a little bit brief. The more advanced optical sensing, where we actually look at biotic stressors, is going to require a lot of work. And that's, I think, it's a technology that still needs some maturation. We have published some data highlighting why this is a problem, and I'm just going to briefly explain what we did. And we basically put out some colored plastic boards, so you can see them here at the bottom. And then we flew our drone at multiple time points, and because they're plastic, we would expect that the reflectance data from them not to change, because if we're going to, and maybe I should start there, if we're going to use very detailed spectral data to detect stress in our crop, we need to rely on some level of consistency in the spectral data we get over space and time, that when we go out and fly, that we can correct for whatever environmental noise there might be in the data. So we try to test that and quantify that noise simply by flying it not over plants, but over some colored objects. And if I just look at 3 of these flights, and they were within 25 minutes, you can actually see that there's some variability here, that line, that red line there is how repeatable they were, is sort of at right around 95%. Well, that means that there's about 5% noise even within 24 minutes. So if the stress signal is very close to 5%, if it's or even lower, we may not be able to detect it. We need to have a stress signal that is much, much stronger. So this is kind of we're going about it in the opposite direction by starting with how much noise we can explain. This gets very technical very quickly. So I'm not spending a lot of time on it, but I think it still shows to you that there's a lot of ways that we can use imaging technology, and there's definitely reasons also to consider that if we are doing if we are very interested in remote sensing and we are inside a greenhouse, or even if we are outside, why not do it at night? Why not use it when we can actually use an active light source where we can control some of that variability? And we are right now doing some studies and actually demonstrating that when the same plants are infested, are imaged during nighttime or during the day, we get a much better, much more reliable stress response if we image them at night when workers are not in the greenhouse. So because the data is more reliable and because the stress signal is stronger, we strongly encourage you, if you are interested in imaging, maybe not use a drone because you can't fly that at night with an imaging system, but maybe try to use an active light source and do it at night. So to summarize here, I hope I have demonstrated to you that there are many ways we can use drones, and we should be using them in flower production. I think there are lots of new research or ongoing research that requires attention. We need to look at how we can use drones to improve pesticide applications. We need to look at hardware to improve releases of natural enemies and other things. We also need to look at, when we are flying these systems, how do the natural enemies survive, and how does that affect their performance? And so there's a lot of technical things that you as growers, you as end users, you need answers to in order to be convinced that this actually works. And that's where we as researchers come in. Definitely looking at the patterns and how we can control the spread of these natural enemies, I think is going to be very important too. So, and think about also, if you are going to go down the route of optical sensing, can you do this at night? Is even outside? And looking at the technologies that goes into that. And of course, there's a lot of software, so we need people with different, not necessarily with an agricultural background, but with an engineering or a computer science background to join us. And that's what many of the young people that are now in my program where they are. So with that, I want to finish up, and I want to start by thanking Bloombeat for sponsoring this event, and also for the different funding bodies that are sponsoring the research we are doing in my lab. And I should also point out that next month there's please come back and look at another presentation by Roberto. And yeah, with that, I am happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nansen. That was a great presentation. And I see we have already a question in the Q&A. It says, hello, my name is Ian Alvarado. I'm from Costa Rica. I currently work with growing flowers for seed. Thank you, Mr. Nansen. It was a very useful talk. Regarding the detection of phytosanitary problems through NDVI, how can we discriminate objects such as flowers with tones similar to the stress signals that a plant gives us in the multispectral image? Can machine learning be applied to these systems to perform this task?
All right. So if you're growing them from seeds, when I was intrigued for a second, because I was wondering whether you could do some detection at the seed level. And so that's actually something obviously you wouldn't be doing that with a drone. Now I could give a whole nother talk about seed imaging and how that can be deployed. That is something I'm working with a lot of companies on so that is something. Now, NDVI. So I'm not exactly sure. I felt there was a lot of things in that question, so I'm trying to pick it apart. So seed imaging, if that is something that you as end users are interested in, we could do I could do another presentation only on imaging of seed. That would be using optical sensing, not with a drone, but with a system, a benchtop system, the same kind of camera, but analyzing seeds that are being moved on a conveyor belt. Then you mentioned NDVI. So NDVI is one of many indices there are, right? Where you take the reflectance at, I believe it's 806 nanometers or 750. So and divided with one another. So it's the difference between the two bands divided with the sum of the two bands. So you are actually, with an NDVI, you are taking values in narrow bands and then using whether you can, and you can, so but the more bands you have, the more indices you can generate, the more information you have. Think of it, I think the best analogy I can come up with is like genetic analysis. If you're going to do detection of a disease in humans or animals or plants or whatever, if you're only screening for one or two genes compared to hundreds or thousands, you have much better chance if you look for if you have more data available. And it's the same thing with imaging data. The more spectral resolution, the more spectral bands you have, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to detect some sort of response to whatever stressor you're looking at. And if you think about the slide I showed with the 5% noise in the data, well, that kind of depends on where you are in the spectrum. It varies a little bit. Some bands are less noisy than others. And what we're really trying to do is minimize that noise as much as possible. So we can do that through correction. But also, if we have more bands, we may be able to there are ways you can tweak the data and actually maximize the difference between your classes. So having more bands means that you need a system that can handle more data. So data processing becomes an issue. But overall, it's more likely with more data that you're going to be able to detect whatever you're looking for. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but so please follow up with some more comments if I'm on the right track, or if I'm on the wrong track, guide me back to where I need to go.
So I think Ian clarified. He says, sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. I work with plants in all their stages of growth, but the ultimate goal is harvesting seeds.
It's what?
Harvesting seeds.
Harvesting seeds. Okay. Right. So you want to harvest seeds. I see. And so so back to your original question, I'm wondering if you early in the season can detect a disease, what remediation, what sort of options do you have? Are you going to be spraying fungicides? What are you trying to do here? Are you going to eliminate patches? What are you going to? So this is the other part of I think of, and that is something a lot of people don't talk about, but I think it's very important. Is one thing is, okay, suppose we have this technology that can tell us when and where we have a problem. That's only useful to us, or to you as growers, to the people who are growers, if there's a way to respond, if you have ways to actually act. If all it gives you is telling you that you have a problem, that's not very useful. You need to have means to address the problem. So maybe, Ian, you can follow up with another question, and what options are you looking at potentially implementing into your flower fields?
So in the meantime, we have another question here. It says, hello, sir. How can we cultivate wide range of cut flowers through advanced research technologies, and what are the export potentials?
I don't think I'm the right person to answer that question. I think that's more like a marketing or a breeding. I'm sure that there are. I looked at the list of speakers. I'm sure the person who asked this question could find somebody in the line of speakers, of past speakers, or AFE can maybe think of that as a topic for a future presentation if it hasn't been covered. So I don't feel comfortable. I don't think I'm in a position to give a decent answer to that question. I'm
I
sorry.
think for that, I heard there is a common talk with Charlie from Texas, who is an economy expert. So
Okay.
there is another question. It says, thank you for your presentation. I want to include the use of drones in a flower crop in my doctoral research. Where can I learn more about this topic?
So what are you interested in more specifically? It's kind of like I started out with one of my initial slides is here's a hammer. So you want to learn about hammers. Where would you go? What is it you want? Are you going to build your own hammer? You're probably not going to build your own drone, I'm assuming. So it depends on what you want to do. And are you going to fly it yourself? So then you need to be certified. So I think the question needs to be more specific for me to be able to help out. And certainly, I mean, one place to start is just there are thousands and thousands of articles about use of drones in crop production. So lots of research to tap into, and YouTube videos if you want to look at more practical aspects.
So here is.
So the downdraft, whether it's going to damage the flowers, that's a good point. I don't know. I mean, you can, so that's something that needs to be tweaked. You don't want to go too close to the crop because also the lower altitude, the more the precision of the drone. So the drone needs to follow a certain flight path. So it relies on GPS. The precision of the GPS. And that is somewhat depending on what satellite or flight control system you have. So this gets complicated very quickly. But generally speaking, the lower the altitude, the more inaccurate the drone flight path gets. So for that reason alone, you don't want to fly too low. So what is going to be the right height? That's probably going to vary on your different flower crops. Some are more. Some flowers will take a downdraft much better than others. So I'm really not answering your question. I'm saying, but I'm thinking that would need to be tested out, and it also depends on how windy it is where you are, because if it's very windy, it depends on the size of the drone that's being used, how big a drone you need to fly, how much the payload that it can handle. So it's definitely a concern. I mean, we should not damage the crop, obviously.
Just to follow up on that, just making sure that everybody knows what the answer is for. The question was, is there a risk of downdraft from the drone damaging the flowers anyway? So that was what you were answering. And I was just making sure because not everybody was able to see that question. And yeah, just to follow up, it may depend on the species, drone size, and
Absolutely.
so here are a couple of questions that are kind of on the same direction. Do you have any experience on using drones inside greenhouses?
I do not. And I don't understand the logic behind that. Because if you're in a greenhouse, you do not want to fly a big drone. So it has to be small. Well, a small drone can only carry very little. So what is it going to carry? Why? And if you're inside a structure, why not have a rail system? Why not have something where you can control things? So yes, there's going to be some initial installation costs, but you already have pipes, you already have beams, you already have something there. I'm I can see from a hobby standpoint or for somebody who likes toys that it's kind of cool to fly a drone inside a greenhouse. I'm just not seeing. I'm not able to see the logic behind it. It doesn't seem clever. You're going to be flying if you're going to image things inside a greenhouse with a drone. So you can't have a light source on the drone because that's too heavy. Light means a lot of energy, and a lot of energy means big battery. Big battery means high payload. High payload means big drone. So that's out the window. So you're going to fly inside, maybe with a little camera. Well, you're going to have shadows. You're going to have scattering of light. You're going to have all sorts of features inside the greenhouse where why not image those plants at night with an active light source and use a rail system? Either you have an imaging system in one part of your greenhouse and you have a robot moving the plants to the imaging system, or you have a robot moving the imaging systems to the plants, one or the other. Drones inside a greenhouse. Give me an application that you think makes sense. I'm still looking for it.
Awesome. I have another question here. So, is that true that many natural enemies need to be released quickly to be effective? And
Absolutely.
so why?
So this is very, very important, right? So this is very, very important that for especially for predatory mites, they have a very short lifespan. So, and this is another reason. So when I put on the slide that it's time saving, this is a big deal. If it takes you several days, if you get a shipment of predatory mites and you have to really organize your crew and then deliver them out, and then they have to walk down the aisles and spread them out. If that takes days, that's compared to having it all done in a couple of hours with a drone. That is a significant difference in performance because those predatory mites, their fecundity, their consumption rate, so all those things, all those aspects, they will decline very, very quickly. And that means that you're not going to get good control.
That's great. Also, would you mind elaborating a little bit more about the sterile insect technique?
Right. So SIT is something that has, so sterile insect technology is a kind of technology that has been around for a long, long time. And it's based on radiation. So it was actually developed as part of nuclear programs. So you can use, and we all know that radiation is something we don't want to get exposed to. Well, you can actually expose male insects to a certain amount of radiation. It will not kill them, but it will make them sterile. So for different species, there will be different dosages that will be needed. So you mass rear a lot of insects and then you expose them to radiation. Now they're sterile. Well, that's perfect because now if we can then, so this is again, another, I like the things where we sort of think of it the other way around. So imagine how that we're actually releasing pests into our systems. A lot of growers would be very, very uncomfortable with that. But what if what if we're only releasing males, and what if those males are sterile? Then we don't have to use pesticides, right? Kind of like that apple grower. So because the sterile males will then mate with females, and those females will lay unfertile eggs. They will not hatch. Okay. So this is a way over time to crash the population. And this is being done in mosquito control, where we are in urban areas where we don't want to fly over and spray pesticides on people, on pets, on livestock and whatnot. So how can we use technologies that allow us to impose some level of pest management without putting living organisms in danger, right? And you can say, well, Christian, that's kind of crazy. Okay, fair enough. But is it crazy? Is it less crazy than thinking, oh, I can just go with a ground rig and I can kill everything that's out there, and only the bad guys, and not only the bad insects and not the good? I think that's equally crazy. It's not. We have an integrated pest management is about looking at multiple options. So this, in conjunction with other methods, I think is something that should be looked at. And with this radiation technology becoming, I mean, there's a lot of fruit fly control. That this is how we eradicated screwworm and now pink bollworm. So it's proven it can be done. Now there's going to be a lot of money going into that, and the government, USDA, or somebody would need to set up these radiation programs. But maybe that's what our tax money should go to. Maybe that's what AFE and other lobbyist organizations, they should sort of promote, that we start what can be produce sterile males of some of the key pests that are out there. And would that work? For some pests, it wouldn't work, actually, because they can, if they have parthenogenesis, meaning that the females can have fertile offspring, viable offspring without the males. If you have no mating, if the males are not necessary, of course, it's not going to work. So for those, it wouldn't work. But for those who require mating, absolutely. I mean, why not?
Yeah, I agree. I think is that the technique that they use for like dengue and chikungunya
That's
control?
so for mosquito. So so there is SIT, but they are also they're doing other things where they're actually using gene editing and manipulating a little symbiont called Wolbachia that lives inside the mosquitoes. So this is just, we need to be open-minded. We need to embrace some of these molecular technologies and see how we can use them to our advantage, so that we don't rely on contact pesticides, right?
Absolutely. So there is one more question here, and I think it may be a follow-up about the greenhouse question, the drones used in the greenhouse. So this person asked, what about using those drones in the greenhouse for spraying?
So again, if you're gonna have a liquid formulation, water's heavy. Unless you can grow, unless you have an anti-gravity machine, so unless you can defy gravity, how are you gonna have a drone carrying all that water? So that's a high payload. That means it's a big drone. You do not want to fly a big drone inside a greenhouse, crashing and causing all kinds of damage and putting people at risk. I would say that's so, and it doesn't need to be a drone. It could be a rover. It could be something driving on the ground, kind of like that people have that vacuum that runs around inside and cleans your house automatically, right? You could have something like that. It doesn't need to be airborne. It would be much easier to have it on the ground running around. So if you want to go that route, don't go drone, go rover.
That's great. You have a lot of thank yous and wonderful presentation comments there. And we're getting close to the end of the hour. So I want to thank you again for a wonderful presentation. And I would like to thank all our audience for joining us today for another session of the AFE Grow Pro webinar series. Please join us next month for Dr. Roberto Lopez's presentation on preventing undesirable purple coloration on cuttings propagated under LEDs. That will be on Tuesday, July the 30th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. You can register at endowment.org/growpro and you will find it at the chat. And while there, check out our past webinar recordings, other grower-related resources, and research reports available for you for free, thanks to our industry support. If you find this webinar series and AFEs and other industry resources valuable, please consider making a donation through the AFE's 2024 annual fundraising campaign. This campaign is in its final 2 weeks, and it will end on June 28th. And every contribution will help making a difference, no matter the size of those contributions. You can make a donation and learn more about the sponsorship opportunities at endowment.org/RISE2024 that you will also find in the chat. And we ask you to please complete a brief survey about today's session where you can suggest any additional topics and help us to continue improve these webinars. Thank you again for your attendance today and have a wonderful day.